In 1931, the tallest building ever constructed opened its doors in Manhattan. President Hoover pressed a button in Washington. Dignitaries applauded. Cameras flashed. The building stood 80% empty. They mocked it as the Empty State Building, Al Smith's last erection, a monument to capitalism's collapse. Within 2 decades, it would become the most famous address in the world. But that transformation required tragedies nobody counted and deaths nobody commemorated. At least 5 workers fell during construction. Over 30 jumped from its observation deck. 14 burned in a plane crash. Millions now visit each year, riding elevators to the same height where men once died without harnesses. This is the story of the Empire State Building. Not the triumph we celebrate, the cost we forgot. The fortune that built the Empire State Building came from one of the most powerful men in American industry. John Jacob Raskob was born in 1,879 inches, Lockport, New York, the son of a cigar maker. His father died when he was young. The family fell into poverty. Raskob left school at 15 and worked as a stenographer to support his mother and siblings. He earned $12 per week. Within 3 decades, he would control one of the largest fortunes in America. In 1900, Raskob found work as secretary to Pierre S. DuPont, heir to the chemical empire. DuPont recognized something in the young clerk. Ambition, perhaps. A gift for numbers. An understanding of how money could multiply itself. Raskob rose quickly. By 1914, he was treasurer of E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company. He managed the family's investments with remarkable success. In 1915, DuPont decided to invest heavily in a struggling automobile company called General Motors. Raskob engineered the deal. The DuPont company eventually acquired 23% of GM's stock. Raskob joined the General Motors board and became chairman of its finance committee. As automobile sales exploded across America through the 1,920 seconds, Raskob's personal fortune grew alongside the company's profits. He developed the installment payment plan that made car ownership accessible to the middle class. Buy now, pay later. It was revolutionary. It made both DuPont and General Motors extraordinarily wealthy. Raskob was a devout Catholic and a fierce opponent of prohibition. He believed the 18th Amendment represented government overreach, cultural tyranny imposed by rural Protestants on urban Catholics and immigrants. In 1928, he threw his considerable wealth behind New York Governor Al Smith's presidential campaign. Smith was Catholic, anti-prohibition, and represented the urban ethnic working class that Raskob himself had risen from. Raskob became chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He poured money into Smith's campaign. The election was a catastrophe. Herbert Hoover, the Republican candidate, crushed Smith in a landslide. Hoover won 40 states. Smith carried only 8. Even New York, Smith's home state, went for Hoover. The defeat was humiliating. Religious prejudice had played a role. Many Americans were not ready for a Catholic president. After the election, Smith needed employment. At 54 years old, he had served 4 terms as governor and lost the only higher office available. Raskob needed a public face for an ambitious real estate project he was contemplating. The 2 men had known each other for years. Their partnership was built on shared religion, shared politics, and shared resentment of the Protestant establishment that had rejected them both. Raskob's idea was simple and audacious. He would build the tallest building in the world, not for any practical purpose. Office space in Manhattan was not scarce in 1928. Raskob wanted a monument. He wanted to prove that a Catholic stenographer's son could build something grander than anything the old money families had ever conceived. He would place Al Smith at the head of the project. The man rejected by America would oversee construction of America's greatest building. The site Raskob selected carried its own symbolism. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel stood at the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street, occupying the entire block. The hotel had been built in the 1,890 seconds by the Astor family, old money aristocrats whose fortune came from fur trading and Manhattan real estate. The Waldorf Astoria represented Gilded Age elegance. Its ballrooms hosted society weddings. Its restaurants served the elite. To demolish it was to announce that the old order was finished. Raskob organized a group of investors and formed Empire State Incorporated. He negotiated with the hotel's owners. The Waldorf Astoria had already been losing ground to newer hotels farther uptown. The site was more valuable than the structure. In August 1929, the deal was finalized. Empire State Incorporated purchased the property for approximately $16 million, though some reports placed the figure as high as $20 million. The exact amount was never fully disclosed. The Waldorf Astoria would close its doors. Demolition would begin by year's end. But Raskob faced competition. Across town, automotive magnate Walter Chrysler was constructing his own monument at 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue. The Chrysler Building was already under construction. Chrysler and his architect, William Van Allen, were determined to build the world's tallest structure. Through 1929, the height of the Chrysler Building kept increasing. Van Allen designed a gleaming Art Deco spire. The plans were kept secret. Raskob demanded that his building be taller, much taller. He hired the architectural firm of Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon. The lead architect, William F. Lamb, had 2 weeks to produce preliminary designs. Lamb later claimed he had been asked a simple question: how high can you make it so that it won't fall down? The answer would determine everything. On the 24th of October 1929, the stock market began to collapse. Black Thursday. Panic selling overwhelmed the exchanges. Raskob watched his General Motors stock plummet. By October 29, Black Tuesday, the crash had become catastrophe. Billions of dollars in paper wealth vanished. Raskob lost millions personally. The entire financial foundation of American prosperity was revealed as speculation and illusion. Within weeks, the nation began sliding into the depression. Banks failed, businesses closed, unemployment climbed. The economic assumptions that had made Raskob's tower seem reasonable were disintegrating. Office space would not be scarce. It would be abundant. No company would be expanding. Most would be contracting or disappearing entirely. The tallest building in the world would open into the worst economy in American history. Raskob could have stopped. The Waldorf Astoria still stood. The purchase could have been unwound. But Raskob proceeded. Perhaps he believed the crash was temporary. Perhaps his ego would not allow retreat. Perhaps he understood that his monument was never about economics. It was about proving something, to himself, to the Protestant establishment, to everyone who had counted him out. In December 1929, Al Smith announced the project publicly. The Empire State Building would rise on the site of the Waldorf Astoria. It would be the tallest structure ever built. Smith would serve as president of Empire State Incorporated. His name would be attached to the project. For a man who had lost the presidency, this was consolation, a different kind of monument, a building instead of a legacy. Demolition of the Waldorf Astoria began on the 1st of October 1930. The old hotel came down quickly. Workers salvaged what they could: marble, fixtures, decorative elements. Much was simply destroyed. Within months, the site was cleared to bare earth. Below that, bedrock, Manhattan's foundation, the place where Raskob's tower would root itself. The height competition with the Chrysler Building had become personal. Walter Chrysler was everything Raskob was not: old stock American, Protestant, a mechanic who had risen through the railroad industry before moving to automobiles. He had built Chrysler Corporation into a major competitor to General Motors. Now he was building a monument to himself at 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue. Through 1929 and into 1930, the Chrysler Building rose rapidly. Its architect, William Van Allen, had designed a distinctive Art Deco tower crowned with gleaming stainless steel arches. The building was beautiful. More importantly, it was tall. Van Allen had secretly constructed a 125-foot spire inside the building's crown. In October 1929, just as the stock market was collapsing, workers hoisted the spire into place. The Chrysler Building now reached 1,046 feet. It was the tallest building in the world. Raskob was not impressed. He instructed his architects to make the Empire State Building taller, much taller. William F. Lamb and his partners revised their plans. The building would rise to 1,250 feet. That would provide a comfortable margin over Chrysler's achievement. But Raskob wanted more than height. He wanted a purpose for that height, or at least the appearance of one. The solution was absurd and brilliant. Lamb designed a mooring mast for dirigibles. The top of the Empire State Building would serve as a dock for passenger airships. Travelers could fly from Europe, moor at the building's crown, and step directly into Manhattan without ever descending to ground level. The mast added 200 feet to the structure. The Empire State Building would now reach 1,454 feet. No one could compete with that. The dirigible dock was nonsense. Airship captains immediately pointed out that updrafts around the building would make mooring impossible. The winds at that height were too strong. The building itself would create turbulence. Passengers would never be able to disembark safely. But the criticism did not matter. The mooring mast served its true purpose. It made the Empire State Building taller than the Chrysler Building. The race was won before construction even began. Demolition of the Waldorf Astoria was completed by March 1930. Workers excavated down to bedrock, approximately 55 feet below street level. The foundation would have to support unprecedented weight. The building's steel frame would rest on concrete and steel grillages anchored directly into Manhattan's schist bedrock. According to some accounts, 2 workers were buried alive during the foundation pour when a wall collapsed. The concrete set before their bodies could be recovered. This story has never been verified. No names were recorded. The official count of construction deaths would eventually list 5 workers. The real number was almost certainly higher. Construction officially began on the 17th of March 1930, St. Patrick's Day, a symbolic choice for a building championed by Irish Catholic politicians and financed by a Catholic industrialist. Al Smith presided over the groundbreaking ceremony. Photographers captured the moment. Smith smiled. Behind him, the depression was deepening. Banks were failing across the country. Unemployment was climbing toward 25%, and work on the world's tallest building was beginning. The general contractor was Starrett Brothers and Eakin. Paul Starrett had built the Chrysler Building and knew how to construct tall structures quickly. Speed was essential. Every month of construction cost money. The faster the building rose, the sooner it could begin generating rental income. Starrett assembled a workforce that would peak at 3,400 men. Most were immigrants. Irish, Italian, and German laborers predominated. Among the most skilled were Mohawk iron workers from the Kahnawake Reservation near Montreal. The Mohawk had been working on high steel since the 1882nd. A bridge construction project near their reservation had introduced them to structural ironwork. The Mohawk proved exceptionally capable at working hundreds of feet above the ground without apparent fear. Whether this was cultural conditioning, genetic predisposition, or simply economic necessity remains debated. What is certain is that Mohawk ironworkers became essential to skyscraper construction across North America. Dozens came to work on the Empire State Building. The work was extraordinarily dangerous. Ironworkers walked narrow beams high above the streets. They caught red-hot rivets thrown from portable forges. They bolted steel columns and beams into place while standing on structures that swayed in the wind. There were no safety harnesses, no nets. A fall meant death. Workers were expected to be careful. Those who showed fear were dismissed. The work required steady nerves and constant attention. One mistake was fatal. The building rose at astonishing speed. At peak efficiency, workers completed 1 floor every day, 4.5 floors per week. The steel frame climbed into the sky faster than any structure in history. Starrett Brothers coordinated deliveries with precision. Steel arrived from Pittsburgh mills on exact schedules. Trucks deposited materials at the site where they were immediately hoisted to the working level. Nothing sat idle. Every motion was calculated for efficiency. By September 1930, 6 months after groundbreaking, the steel framework had reached the 75th floor. By November, it topped out at the 86th floor. The mooring mast was completed by spring 1931. The pace was unprecedented. Workers who had labored on previous skyscrapers said they had never seen anything like it. The building seemed to will itself into existence. But the speed had consequences. Men fell. The official death toll listed 5 workers killed during construction. One rigger named J.L. Smith fell from the 5th floor on the 4th of September, 1930. Another worker, A. Griffin, fell to his death 2 weeks later. A laborer named Mike Duffy was killed on the 15th of October, 1930. 2 more deaths followed in the winter months. 5 officially. But construction workers and historians have long suspected the real count was higher. 8 to 14 deaths was the range most commonly suggested. Families of dead workers were reportedly paid to remain silent. The Empire State Building was a symbol. Bad publicity would harm its prospects. Investors wanted success stories, not tragedies. The names of most victims were never published in newspapers. They appear in no memorial. Many were immigrants. Some may have been working under assumed names. Their deaths were absorbed into the building's foundations and forgotten. The working day lasted 12 hours or more. Conditions were brutal. Winter cold at 1,000 feet was unbearable. Summer heat on steel beams caused burns. The noise was constant. Riveters hammered red-hot bolts into place, securing beam to column, creating the skeleton that would hold 85 floors of limestone and brick. The riveting teams worked in groups of 4. One man heated rivets in a portable forge until they glowed red. Another caught the rivet in a metal cone when it was thrown. A third held it in place with tongs. The 4th drove it home with a pneumatic hammer. The sound echoed across Midtown Manhattan. Bricklayers followed the steelwork, encasing the frame in Indiana limestone and brick. The facade was designed to be elegant and relatively simple. Vertical lines emphasized height. Setbacks at the 5th, 25th, 72nd, 81st, and 86th floors complied with New York's zoning laws while creating the building's distinctive profile. The exterior proceeded almost as quickly as the steel. The building was taking its final form. Inside, an army of craftsmen installed mechanical systems. Elevators were crucial. The building would have 67 elevators, serving 85 floors of office space. 4 high-speed elevators would carry passengers to the observation deck on the 86th floor. The elevator shafts rose through the center of the building. Steam heating, electrical wiring, plumbing, ventilation, all had to be threaded through the structure. 10 million bricks. 730 tons of aluminum and stainless steel. 6,514 windows. Everything arrived on schedule. Everything was installed immediately. The final cost came to $40,800,000, approximately $25 million for the building itself, $15 to $16 million for the land. In an era when a comfortable house cost $5,000 and the average worker earned perhaps $1,500 per year, the Empire State Building represented wealth beyond comprehension. It was also completed under budget. Raskob had projected costs as high as $50 million. Starrett Brothers delivered for less. On the 1st of May, 1931, the Empire State Building officially opened. President Herbert Hoover pressed a button in Washington, D.C. that symbolically turned on the building's lights. In New York, Al Smith stood at the building's entrance with dignitaries, investors, and reporters. Former Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt attended. Photographers captured the moment. Smith smiled for the cameras. His name was on the building. His office would be on the top floor. The building stood 80% vacant. Of the 2 million square feet of rentable office space, only 20% had been leased. The Depression had destroyed the commercial real estate market. Companies were not expanding. They were contracting or disappearing. Nobody needed new office space. The Empire State Building opened as the largest, tallest, most modern office building in the world. Almost nobody wanted to rent there. The mockery began immediately. Journalists called it the Empty State Building, Al Smith's last erection, a monument to capitalism's failure. The tallest building in the world stood mostly dark. Windows on upper floors remained unlit. Entire floors had no tenants at all. The building that was supposed to announce America's dominance announced instead its collapse. Raskob had gambled that the Depression would be brief. He had assumed that by the time construction finished, the economy would have recovered. He was catastrophically wrong. The Depression deepened through 1931 and 1932. Banks failed by the hundreds, unemployment reached 25%. Businesses that survived were cutting costs, not expanding office space. The Empire State Building offered 2 million square feet of the most modern office space in the world. Almost nobody could afford to rent it. The building's investors faced financial ruin. Empire State Incorporated had borrowed heavily to finance construction. The mortgage payments were enormous. Rental income was supposed to cover those payments and provide profit. Instead, rental income barely covered operating expenses. The building was hemorrhaging money. By 1933, the mortgage was in default. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, which held the mortgage, could have foreclosed. They chose not to. Foreclosing on the world's tallest building during the Depression would have been a public relations disaster. Better to let Empire State Incorporated struggle along and hope conditions improved. Al Smith maintained his office on the 80th floor. He showed up for work each day, a visible symbol of the project's respectability. But his presence could not fill the vacant floors below him. Smith's role was largely ceremonial. He greeted important visitors. He gave interviews to reporters. He defended the building against critics. But he could not change the economics. The Empire State Building was a magnificent failure. The observation deck became the building's salvation. Tourists would not rent office space, but they would pay to ride elevators to the 86th floor and look out over Manhattan. The admission fee was modest, $1 for adults. The observation deck opened with the building in May 1931. Within months, it was generating more revenue than all the office rentals combined. This was humiliating. The tallest office building in the world was surviving as a tourist attraction. The building's management desperately sought tenants. They offered generous terms, below-market rates, free months of rent, flexible lease arrangements. Slowly, companies began moving in. Not the blue-chip corporations Raskob had imagined. Small businesses, struggling firms looking for cheap space. Companies that could not afford the more prestigious addresses downtown. By 1935, occupancy had climbed to approximately 60%, better than the 20% at opening, but still far below the 90% needed for profitability. The dirigible mooring mast proved as useless as critics had predicted. Only one airship ever attempted to moor at the Empire State Building. On the 15th of September, 1931, a small private blimp approached the mast. Updrafts from the building's mass made the approach terrifying. The blimp managed to attach its nose to the mooring post for approximately 3 minutes. Newspapers delivered to the blimp from the building's crown blew away in the wind. The passengers remained in the gondola, too frightened to attempt the transfer to the building. The blimp disconnected and departed. No airship ever tried again. The mooring mast remained, a 200-foot monument to Raskob's ego and the absurdity of the height race. The building attracted attention of a different kind. On the morning of the 1st of February 1933, a man climbed the observation deck's safety fence. He stood on the narrow ledge beyond the barrier. Guards noticed him too late. He jumped. His body fell 1,050 feet and crashed through the roof of a building across the street. He was never identified. He became the first person to commit suicide from the Empire State Building. More followed. The observation deck offered an easy method for those determined to die. The fence could be climbed. The ledge was accessible. The fall was instantaneous and certain. By the end of 1933, 5 people had jumped. The building's management installed higher fences. They added guards trained to watch for potential jumpers. But the suicides continued. The Empire State Building was becoming known as a destination for those who had lost hope. The symbolism was unavoidable. The tallest monument to American capitalism was also its most convenient suicide location. Through the 1,930 seconds, the building struggled financially but endured physically. The structure required constant maintenance. The exterior had to be cleaned. The mechanical systems needed repair. The elevators required service. A staff of janitors, engineers, security guards, and administrators kept the building operational. Many of these workers were grateful for the employment. In the Depression, any job was precious. The Empire State Building provided hundreds of positions. That counted for something. Some of the building's early tenants were unusual. The 60th floor housed the laboratories of the Radio Corporation of America. RCA was experimenting with television broadcasting. They installed an antenna on the building's mooring mast. In 1935, RCA began experimental television broadcasts from the Empire State Building. The broadcasts reached receivers within a 50-mile radius. This was the beginning of what would become a crucial revenue stream. Broadcasting companies would eventually pay substantial sums to place antennas on the world's tallest structure. Other tenants included import-export firms, small manufacturers' representatives, travel agencies, and insurance companies. None were prestigious. None were the major corporations that were supposed to fill a building of this scale. But they paid rent. That was enough. The building was no longer a complete disaster. It was merely an expensive disappointment. Raskob had lost millions. His stock in Empire State Incorporated was worthless. His reputation as a financial genius was tarnished. He had built the world's tallest building at exactly the wrong moment in history. The monument that was supposed to prove his vision had proved only his poor timing. He remained wealthy from his General Motors and DuPont investments. But the Empire State Building was a permanent stain on his legacy. Al Smith suffered differently. He had never been wealthy. The job at Empire State Incorporated was supposed to provide him with security after his political career ended. Instead, it provided him with embarrassment. He showed up each day to an office in a mostly empty building that bore his name as a joke. Smith had been rejected by American voters in 1928. Now he was rejected by American commerce. He remained at his post through the 1,930 seconds, a symbol of persistence, or perhaps stubbornness. He would not abandon the building, even as the building seemed to abandon him. The building's architects fared better. Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon had delivered the project on time and under budget. That alone was remarkable. The Empire State Building's failure was not architectural. The design worked. The structure was sound. The elevators operated smoothly. The mechanical systems functioned as planned. The problem was economic. No one had anticipated the Depression. No one had imagined that the world's tallest building would open into the world's worst economy. The architects could not be blamed for that. Their reputation survived. The workers who built it received no recognition at all. 5 had died officially, perhaps twice that number in reality. Their names appeared in no memorial. No plaque honored their sacrifice. The building they had constructed stood as a testament to failure. The men who had died building it were forgotten before the building even opened. This was the way of such things. Workers were expendable. Their labor was purchased. Their deaths were absorbed into the cost of construction. The building mattered. The men who built it did not. The Empire State Building entered the Second World War as a symbol of American resilience. The Depression had not killed it. Occupancy had slowly climbed through the late 1,930 seconds. By 1941, the building was approximately 75% full. Not profitable, but no longer the disaster it had been. Then Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America mobilized for total war. The building found purpose. The federal government leased multiple floors for war-related offices. Military procurement agencies moved in. Intelligence services took space. The Office of Price Administration occupied several floors, managing rationing and price controls. Suddenly, the Empire State Building was full. The government paid market rates without complaint. For the first time since opening, the building generated substantial rental income. The war was saving what the Depression had nearly destroyed. Security became paramount. Guards checked identification. Access to certain floors was restricted. The observation deck remained open to the public, but visitors were screened more carefully. Enemy agents were a constant fear. The tallest building in America was also the most visible target. Air raid wardens worried about what a determined attack might do. The building was too large to hide, too tall to protect. It simply stood and hoped. On the morning of the 28th of July, 1945, fog blanketed Manhattan. Visibility was near zero. A B-25 Mitchell bomber, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel William Franklin Smith, Jr., was flying from Bedford, Massachusetts to Newark Airport. Smith was an experienced pilot with over 1,000 hours of flight time. He was ferrying the bomber back to base after a maintenance run. Two other men were aboard: Staff Sergeant Christopher Domitrovich, the co-pilot, and Albert Perna, a Navy machinist, hitching a ride. Smith should not have been flying. Weather conditions were below minimums for visual flight rules. The control tower at LaGuardia Field warned him that visibility was less than 3 miles. Smith replied that he wanted to land at Newark. The controller cleared him, but advised caution. Smith descended into the fog. He was flying blind. At 9:40 a.m., the bomber emerged from the fog bank, traveling approximately 200 miles per hour. It was flying north up Fifth Avenue. Office workers in buildings along the avenue looked up and saw the plane appear impossibly low between the buildings. The B-25 was at approximately 900 feet altitude. The Empire State Building rose 1,454 feet. Smith was below the building's summit and heading directly toward it. He pulled up. The bomber climbed steeply, not steeply enough. At 9:49 a.m., the B-25 struck the north face of the Empire State Building between the 78th and 79th floors. The impact created a hole 18 feet wide and 20 feet tall. The plane's wings sheared off. The fuselage punched through the exterior wall and penetrated deep into the building. One engine tore through the structure and emerged from the south side, crashing through the roof of a 12-story building on 33rd Street. It started a fire. The second engine and part of the landing gear crashed into an elevator shaft. The plane's fuel tanks ruptured on impact. 1,000 gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline ignited. A fireball erupted from the north face of the building. Flames shot out of windows on the 79th floor. Black smoke poured into the sky. People on the streets below screamed and ran. Debris rained down. Pieces of the aircraft, chunks of limestone, shards of glass, papers, and office furniture all tumbled toward the pavement. All 3 men aboard the bomber died instantly. Lieutenant Colonel Smith was thrown through the aircraft's windscreen and into the building. His body was found in an elevator shaft. Staff Sergeant Domitrovich and Albert Perna died in the initial impact. Their bodies were recovered from the wreckage days later. Inside the building, workers on the 79th floor had no warning. The plane struck the north side where the Catholic War Relief Services maintained offices. 11 employees were at work. The impact killed 10 instantly. The explosion incinerated some. Others were crushed by debris or hurled through windows by the blast. One woman survived the initial impact but died later from burns and injuries. On the 80th floor, directly above the impact site, workers felt the building shudder. Smoke began pouring through the floor. Some thought a boiler had exploded. Others realized immediately that something had struck the building. They evacuated down the staircases. The elevators were not functioning. The crash had severed cables and damaged the elevator machinery. Betty Lou Oliver was a 20-year-old elevator operator working in the building that morning. She had been operating an elevator on a lower floor when the plane hit. The impact threw her from the elevator car. She suffered severe burns and a broken back. Rescue workers placed her in a different elevator car to take her down to the lobby where ambulances were waiting. They did not realize that the crash had weakened the cables. The elevator descended normally for a few floors. Then the cables snapped. The car went into free fall. Betty Lou Oliver plummeted 75 floors. The elevator crashed into the basement. The emergency braking system failed. The bottom of the shaft had filled with water from broken pipes, and severed cables had coiled there, creating a crude cushion. Somehow, Betty Lou Oliver survived. Rescue workers found her alive in the wreckage. She had survived a fall of approximately 1,000 feet. It remains the longest survived elevator fall in history. She would spend months in the hospital recovering from her injuries. The fire burned for 40 minutes. Firefighters arrived within minutes of the crash but faced extraordinary challenges. The fire was on the 79th floor. Water pressure at that height was inadequate. Hoses had to be connected to standpipes, and pumps laboriously hauled up stairwells. Smoke filled the upper floors. Visibility was nearly zero. Firefighters worked their way through burning offices, pulling bodies from the wreckage. By 10:30 a.m., the fire was under control. The structure had held. The Empire State Building's steel frame had absorbed the impact without catastrophic failure. The hole in the exterior was substantial but localized. The building did not collapse. Engineers later estimated that the B-25 weighed approximately 18,000 pounds at impact. The Empire State Building weighed 365,000 tons. The plane barely moved it. 14 people died. The 3 men aboard the aircraft, 11 people working in the building. The bodies were removed over the following days. Families were notified. Funerals were held. The dead included secretaries, clerks, and administrators, people who had come to work on a Saturday morning. The crash was ruled accidental. Lieutenant Colonel Smith had made a fatal error in judgment. He had flown into conditions he could not handle. The Empire State Building had been in the wrong place. The building reopened for business on Monday, the 30th of July, 1945, just 2 days after the crash. Repairs to the damaged floors would take months, but the rest of the building was operational. Tenants returned to work. Elevators resumed normal service. The observation deck remained closed temporarily, but would reopen within weeks. The Empire State Building had been struck by a bomber and survived. It was a testament to the engineering. The dead, however, remained dead. No amount of structural integrity brought them back. The crash received extensive press coverage. Photographs of the burning building appeared on front pages across the country. Newsreel footage showed the damage. The story competed with news from the Pacific Theater, where the war was entering its final phase. Less than 2 weeks later, on the 6th of August 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The Empire State Building plane crash became historical footnote. 14 dead in Manhattan could not compete with 100,000 dead in Japan. The accident prompted changes to aviation regulations. Pilots were reminded that visual flight rules required minimum visibility. Flying into fog between skyscrapers was prohibited. Air traffic controllers were instructed to refuse clearance when conditions were unsafe. But Lieutenant Colonel Smith was dead and could not be disciplined. The regulations came too late for him and too late for the 11 people he had killed. The building's structural damage was repaired over the following months. Workers replaced the damaged limestone and brick. New windows were installed. The offices on the 79th floor were rebuilt. By early 1946, no visible trace of the crash remained. The building looked exactly as it had before. Only those who had been present on the 28th of July, 1945, remembered what had happened. And the families of the dead, they would remember forever. The war ended. The economy boomed. The Empire State Building finally became profitable. By 1950, 19 years after opening, the building was generating net income for the first time. The Depression was over. The empty floors filled. The joke became reality. The empty State Building was empty no longer. The observation deck continued to draw crowds. Tourists came from across America and around the world to ride the elevators to the 86th floor. The view stretched for miles. On clear days, visitors could see 80 miles in every direction. The admission fee remained modest, $1 or $2. Families saved for the trip. Soldiers brought their sweethearts. The observation deck became the most popular tourist attraction in New York City. More popular than the Statue of Liberty. More popular than Central Park. The building that had opened as a financial disaster had become an icon. But the observation deck attracted more than tourists. It attracted the desperate. The fence installed in the 1,930 seconds was insufficient. Determined individuals could climb it. On the 1st of May, 1947, a Thursday afternoon, a 3-year-old bookkeeper named Evelyn McHale arrived at the Empire State Building. She rode the elevator to the 86th floor observation deck. She removed her coat and folded it neatly on the railing. Then she climbed over the fence and jumped. Evelyn fell 1,050 feet. Her body struck the roof of a United Nations limousine parked on 34th Street. The impact was catastrophic but strangely composed. A photography student named Robert Wiles was across the street when he heard the crash. He ran to the scene with his camera. What he saw was extraordinary. Evelyn's body lay on the crushed roof of the car in an almost peaceful pose. Her legs were crossed at the ankles. Her right hand rested on her stomach. Her eyes were closed. She looked as though she were sleeping. The violence of the fall was evident in the wreckage around her, but her expression was serene. Wiles took a photograph. The image appeared in Life magazine on the 12th of May, 1947, with the caption, "The Most Beautiful Suicide." The photograph became famous. It circulated for decades. Artists referenced it. Andy Warhol would later use it in his work. The image captured something about death and beauty and urban despair that resonated across generations. Evelyn McHale became the most famous person to jump from the Empire State Building. Her suicide note was found in her coat pocket. She had written it that morning. The note explained that she did not want to be a burden to anyone. She asked that her body not be seen by her fiancé. She apologized. The note was brief and polite. Evelyn had been engaged to a man named Barry Rhodes, a college student studying at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. They had met recently. The engagement was new. Something had gone wrong. The details were never made public. Evelyn chose death over whatever future awaited her. The building's management responded by raising the observation deck fence. They installed barriers that extended higher and angled inward, making climbing more difficult. Guards were instructed to watch visitors more carefully. Anyone who appeared distraught or behaved suspiciously was to be approached and questioned. But the suicides continued. People found ways. Some jumped from office windows on lower floors. Others managed to climb the improved barriers. Between 1947 and 1950, at least 5 more people died jumping from the Empire State Building. The building became associated with death in the public imagination. This association competed with its role as tourist attraction and office building. The Empire State Building was simultaneously a place of wonder and a place of tragedy. Visitors rode elevators to admire the view from the same location where others had chosen to die. The contradiction was never resolved. The building simply contained both realities. In 1933, the building found new cultural life through cinema. RKO Pictures released King Kong, a film about a giant ape brought from a remote island to New York City. In the film's climax, Kong climbs the Empire State Building while clutching the actress Ann Darrow. Biplanes attack him. He swats at them from the building's summit. Eventually, he falls. The Empire State Building survives. Kong does not. The film was a massive success. It made the Empire State Building famous to audiences who would never visit New York. The building became a character in American popular culture. Not just the tallest building, but the building where King Kong died. Children across America knew the silhouette, the Art Deco spire, the setbacks, the mooring mast where Kong made his final stand. The building's failure as a real estate investment was forgotten. Its success as a symbol was complete. Through the 1,950 seconds, the building became home to radio and television broadcasters. Multiple stations installed antennas and transmission equipment. The height that Raskob had pursued for ego now served a practical purpose. Signals broadcast from 1,454 feet could reach millions of homes. Broadcasting companies paid substantial rent for antenna space. This became a significant revenue stream. The mooring masts that had never moored dirigibles now bristled with transmission equipment. The building's tenant roster improved. Prestigious companies began taking space. Law firms opened offices. Financial services firms moved in. The building was no longer home to struggling small businesses. It was becoming a respectable address. Not the most prestigious in Manhattan. That remained downtown or along Park Avenue, but respectable. Solid. A place where successful companies could locate without embarrassment. Al Smith remained in his office until his death on the 4th of October 1944. He had been president of Empire State Incorporated for 13 years. He had watched the building struggle through the Depression and begin its recovery during the war. He did not live to see it become profitable. Smith died at age 70 of heart failure and lung congestion. His funeral was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Thousands attended. He was remembered as a progressive governor and a champion of working people. The Empire State Building was mentioned in his obituaries as his final project. The joke had faded. By 1944, the building was no longer empty. Smith had outlasted the mockery. John Jacob Raskob lived until the 15th of October, 1950. He was 71 years old when he died at his estate in Maryland. Raskob had made and lost fortunes. His investment in the Empire State Building had been disastrous financially but vindicated culturally. The building stood. It had become famous. It generated revenue. It had survived everything. Depression, war, plane crashes, suicides. The building endured. Raskob's obituaries noted his role in building it. The folly had become legacy. The building's original investors never recovered their money. Most had been wiped out during the Depression. Empire State Incorporated restructured its debt multiple times through the 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds. Metropolitan Life Insurance, which held the mortgage, eventually took control. The original shareholders received nothing. They had built the tallest building in the world and lost everything doing it. The building made money for its later owners. The men who financed its construction died, broke, or diminished. This was the pattern. Those who built received no reward. The workers who died during construction were forgotten. The investors who financed it were ruined. The men who envisioned it, Raskob and Smith, saw it become a joke before witnessing its redemption. Only the building itself succeeded. It stood. It functioned. It became iconic. The human cost was irrelevant to the structure's triumph. The Empire State Building was a monument that required sacrifice. It consumed those who created it and rewarded those who came after. By the 1,960 seconds, the Empire State Building was no longer the world's tallest structure. New buildings in Manhattan had surpassed it. The World Trade Center's Twin Towers were under construction and would reach 1,368 and 1,362 feet when completed in the early 1,970 seconds. The Empire State Building's reign as tallest had lasted 40 years. That record would not be broken, but height no longer mattered as much as it once had. The building had become something more valuable than tall. It had become timeless. The suicides continued. Through the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, people kept jumping. The barriers were raised again. Guards became more vigilant, but deaths still occurred. Some jumped from office windows on the lower floors. Others found ways around the observation deck barriers. The exact number of suicides from the Empire State Building has never been definitively established. Estimates range from 30 to 50 people between 1,931 and the present day. Some deaths were well publicized. Most were not. The building absorbed them quietly and moved on. On the 16th of December, 1977, the observation deck barriers were tested in an unusual way. A woman jumped from the 86th floor but did not die. She landed on a ledge on the 85th floor, one floor below. She survived with a broken pelvis and other injuries. Guards reached her and brought her back inside. She was taken to a hospital and survived. The incident demonstrated that the building had ledges and setbacks that could break a fall. Death was not guaranteed, but most who jumped did not land on ledges. They fell the full distance. They died. The building underwent constant maintenance and periodic renovation. The exterior limestone required cleaning. Decades of city pollution had darkened the facade. Workers installed new windows. The mechanical systems were upgraded. The elevators were modernized while maintaining the Art Deco interiors that had become iconic. The building was aging, but remained functional. Each improvement cost millions. The revenue from office rents and observation deck admission paid for everything. The building maintained itself. In 1976, the building's owners installed colored floodlights that could illuminate the upper floors in different combinations. The lighting system allowed the building to be lit in specific colors to commemorate holidays, events, and causes. Red, white, and blue for Independence Day. Green for St. Patrick's Day. Pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. The building became a canvas for civic expression. The lights could be seen for miles. The Empire State Building announced celebrations and commemorations to the entire city. The lighting choices occasionally caused controversy. In 1998, the building was lit red and yellow to honor the Chinese Lunar New Year. Some interpreted the colors as celebrating the Communist government of China. Protests followed. The building's management defended the choice as cultural celebration, not political endorsement. The controversy passed. The lights continued. Over time, the colored lighting became one of the building's most distinctive features. Visitors asked what the colors meant. A calendar of scheduled lighting arrangements was published. The building's silhouette, already famous, now carried meaning beyond its form. On the 11th of September 2001, terrorists attacked New York City. Two hijacked aircraft struck the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Both towers collapsed. Nearly 3,000 people died. The Empire State Building was suddenly the tallest building in Manhattan again. It had not sought this distinction. The Twin Towers had surpassed it 3 decades earlier. Their destruction restored the Empire State Building's height supremacy by default. The symbolism was uncomfortable. The building stood because others had fallen. In the days after September 11, the Empire State Building became a symbol of resilience. It had survived the Depression. It had survived a plane crash in 1945. It had survived decades of competition and changing skylines. Now it stood as a reminder that structures could endure. The building's owners increased security dramatically. Access to the observation deck required screening comparable to airport security. Bags were searched. Metal detectors were installed. Guards watched constantly. The building that had once welcomed anyone who could pay the admission fee now scrutinized every visitor. The terrorist attacks changed how Americans thought about tall buildings. Skyscrapers had always been symbols of achievement. Now they were also targets. The Empire State Building's prominence made it a potential objective for future attacks. Security planners studied scenarios. Additional measures were implemented. Barriers were erected at street level to prevent vehicle attacks. The lobby access was restricted. The building hardened itself against threats that had not existed when it was constructed. Despite these concerns, the observation deck remained popular. Tourism to New York City declined immediately after September 11, but recovered within a few years. Visitors returned. They wanted to see the city from above. They wanted to stand where so many had stood before. The Empire State Building offered that connection. 4 million people per year rode the elevators to the 86th floor. Some continued to the 102nd floor observation deck, which offered an even higher vantage point. The building generated more revenue from tourism than from office rents. The tourists were keeping it alive. The building's cultural presence expanded through film and television. Dozens of movies featured the Empire State Building. Sleepless in Seattle ended with a romantic meeting at the observation deck. Independence Day showed the building destroyed by alien spacecraft. The building was climbed, destroyed, defended, and celebrated across popular culture. Each appearance reinforced its status. The Empire State Building was more than architecture. It was a symbol that could carry any meaning filmmakers wanted to attach to it. In 1986, the Empire State Building was designated a National Historic Landmark. This status brought restrictions. The exterior could not be significantly altered. Any changes required approval from preservation authorities. The building's Art Deco details were protected. The lobby, with its soaring ceiling and marble walls, was preserved. The building had become history. It could not be demolished. It could not be substantially changed. It would remain as it was built, minus whatever modifications had already been made over the decades. The designation confirmed what had become obvious. The Empire State Building mattered not because it was the tallest, but because it had endured. 75 years after opening, it remained functional and relevant. The office space was desirable. The observation deck was popular. The building worked. That alone justified its preservation. But the symbolic value exceeded the practical. The Empire State Building represented New York City in a way that newer, taller buildings never would. It had been there through everything: depression, war, terrorism, cultural transformation. The building stood witness to the city's history. On the 23rd of February 1997, violence returned to the observation deck. A 9-year-old Palestinian man named Ali Abu Kamal rode the elevator to the 86th floor. He carried a .380 caliber Beretta semi-automatic pistol. At approximately 5 p.m., he opened fire on the crowded observation deck. He shot 7 people. One victim, a 27-year-old Danish musician named Christopher Burmeister, died from his wounds. 6 others were injured, some critically. After shooting the victims, Kamal turned the gun on himself and died by suicide. Witnesses reported that Kamal had appeared calm before the attack. He had not shouted or made any statement. He simply began shooting. The attack lasted less than a minute. Security guards and police responded quickly, but Kamal was already dead. The wounded were rushed to hospitals. The observation deck was evacuated and closed. Blood stained the floor where the victims had fallen. Investigators searched Kamal's belongings and interviewed family members. He had been carrying letters that suggested financial and personal problems. He blamed the United States for his difficulties. The writings indicated planning. This was not a sudden impulse. Kamal had traveled from Florida to New York specifically to carry out the attack. He had purchased the gun legally. Nothing in his background had raised flags. He was an elderly man with no criminal record. He had simply decided to kill strangers at the top of America's most famous building. The attack raised questions about observation deck security. Visitors were not screened before entering. Anyone could buy a ticket and ride the elevator. Metal detectors had been proposed over the years but never implemented. The building's management had resisted such measures as excessive and unwelcoming. After the shooting, that position changed. Within months, metal detectors and bag searches were installed. Every visitor to the observation deck would now pass through security screening. The openness was gone. The building had hardened itself again. The cumulative death toll from the Empire State Building defied easy calculation. At least 5 workers had died during construction, possibly twice that number. 14 had died in the 1945 plane crash. 1 had died in the 1997 shooting. Between 30 and 50 had committed suicide by jumping from the observation deck or office windows. The exact number would never be known with certainty. Some deaths were not publicized. Some records were incomplete, but the building had claimed at least 50 lives, probably more. This was the cost of being the most famous building in America. No memorial existed for any of them. The construction workers who fell had no plaque. The plane crash victims were commemorated nowhere in the building. The suicide victims left no trace. Christopher Burmeister, the man shot in 1997, had no marker. The building simply absorbed the deaths and continued. Each tragedy became historical footnote. The building itself was the story. The dead were details. This absence of commemoration was not unique to the Empire State Building. Most structures built during the Depression did not memorialize construction workers who died. Death was considered an inevitable cost of large projects. Workers understood the risks. They accepted the danger in exchange for employment. When someone fell, the work continued. The building mattered more than the individual. This attitude had prevailed for centuries. The Empire State Building simply exemplified it on a grand scale. The suicides presented a different problem. Families of those who jumped rarely wanted public acknowledgement. Suicide carried stigma. Families preferred silence. The building's management had no interest in publicizing deaths that might discourage tourists. The observation deck was a revenue generator. Drawing attention to its role as a suicide location would harm business. So the deaths were handled quietly. Bodies were removed. Police filed reports. Newspapers sometimes mentioned the incidents briefly, then silence. The building moved on. The 1,997 shooting victim was different. Christopher Burmeister had not chosen to die. He was murdered. His death was not tragedy of personal despair, but of random violence. Yet even his death produced no lasting memorial in the building. His family mourned in Denmark. The observation deck reopened after enhanced security was installed. Tourists returned. Within months, the shooting faded from public consciousness. The building continued selling tickets. 4 million visitors per year provided revenue that made memorials unnecessary and commercially unwise. By the early 2000s, the Empire State Building had become one of the most recognizable structures on Earth. It appeared in films, television shows, advertisements, and tourist brochures. The silhouette was iconic. The Art Deco crown, the setback design, the colored lights. The building represented New York City more effectively than any other structure. Even the Statue of Liberty carried less immediate association with the city itself. The Empire State Building was New York made vertical. The building's ownership changed hands multiple times over its history. In 1951, Roger Stevens and a group of investors purchased the building for $51 million. In 1961, Lawrence Wien and Peter Malkin gained control through a complex transaction. The Malkin family would retain ownership for decades. In 2006, the building was valued at approximately $2 billion. The structure that had bankrupted its original investors had become one of the most valuable properties in Manhattan. The building had outlasted everyone who built it and rewarded those who simply held on. In 2009, the Empire State Building underwent a major renovation focused on energy efficiency. The project cost $550 million and aimed to reduce the building's energy consumption by 38%. New windows were installed. The heating and cooling systems were upgraded. Insulation was improved. The building that had been constructed in 1931 was being retrofitted for the 21st century. The work was completed gradually to avoid disrupting tenants. By 2013, the renovation was finished. The building looked the same from outside but operated with far greater efficiency internally. The observation deck continued to generate substantial revenue. Admission prices increased over the decades. By the 2010 seconds, tickets cost between $40 and $75, depending on the level visited and whether visitors paid extra to skip the line. The building had become a premium tourist experience. The wait to reach the observation deck could exceed 2 hours during peak times. Visitors stood in multiple queues, passed through security screening, and endured a series of controlled passages before finally riding the elevators upward. The experience was carefully managed to maximize revenue and control crowds. 4 million visitors per year meant the building processed approximately 11,000 people daily. This required extensive staffing and infrastructure. Security personnel screened bags and operated metal detectors. Elevator operators managed the flow of tourists. Retail staff sold souvenirs and photographs. The observation deck had become a complex commercial operation. The building earned more from tourism than from the office tenants who occupied the floors below. The skyscraper built to house corporate offices survived because tourists wanted to stand where King Kong had died. The building's lighting ceremonies became increasingly elaborate. The colors changed for hundreds of different occasions each year. Pride Month was celebrated with rainbow lights. Veterans Day with red, white, and blue. Holidays, cultural celebrations, charitable causes, all received their own color combinations. The building became a visual calendar for the city. Residents looked up at night to see what was being commemorated. The lighting had transformed the building from static monument to active participant in civic life. Some lighting choices generated controversy. In 2012, the building refused to light its tower green for St. Patrick's Day because the Catholic Archbishop of New York had spoken against same-sex marriage. In 2015, it lit the tower orange for the Lunar New Year, but sparked criticism about which cultural celebrations deserved recognition. The building's management navigated these disputes carefully. Each decision about lighting was political. Each color combination carried meaning. The building had become a symbol that multiple groups wanted to claim. On the 3rd of November 2010, a New York-based real estate company called Malkin Holdings filed paperwork to take the Empire State Building public through an initial public offering. The building would become part of a real estate investment trust. In 2013, the IPO proceeded. Empire State Realty Trust began trading on the New York Stock Exchange. The building's value was now determined by stock price. Investors could buy shares. The building had become fully financialized. The structure was no longer just property. It was a tradable asset whose value fluctuated with market conditions. The IPO valued Empire State Realty Trust at approximately $4.3 billion. This included the Empire State Building and other properties. The building itself was valued at roughly $2.5 billion. The structure that had cost $41 million to build and had nearly bankrupted its investors was now worth 60 times its construction cost in inflation-adjusted terms. The building had become extraordinarily valuable, not because it housed important businesses, not because it was the tallest, but because it was famous. The cultural value had translated into financial value. The original investors who had funded construction in 1930 had received nothing. They had lost everything during the Depression. The building's early owners had struggled through decades of losses and near bankruptcy. The Malkin family, which had acquired control in 1961, had held through the difficult years and prospered. They were now billionaires. The building had made them wealthy. The pattern was consistent. Those who built received no reward. Those who endured were compensated extravagantly. The building rewarded patience, not vision. The Empire State Building has now stood for over 90 years. It has survived everything: economic collapse, war, plane crashes, terrorist attacks, suicides, shootings, changes in architecture, culture, and commerce. The building endures. It remains one of the most visited tourist attractions in the world. 4 million people per year ride its elevators to stand where others have died and look out over the city that rejected it, then embraced it, then could not imagine itself without it. The workers who built it are forgotten. Their names do not appear on any memorial. The 5 officially recorded deaths during construction represent men whose identities were rarely preserved in newspapers or company records. The additional deaths that likely occurred remain speculation. Families were paid for silence. The building's reputation mattered more than acknowledging casualties. This was standard practice in the 1,930 seconds. Workers understood the risks. Death was the cost of employment during the Depression. The building absorbed those deaths and moved on. The plane crash victims of 1,945 are similarly absent from the building itself. No plaque marks the 79th floor, where Lieutenant Colonel William Franklin Smith, Jr. crashed his B-25 bomber. No memorial acknowledges the 14 people who died that morning. The damaged floors were repaired. The building continued operating. Within 2 days, tenants returned to work. The crash became historical anecdote, famous for Betty Lou Oliver's miraculous survival, rather than for the deaths it caused. The building survived. The dead did not. That was the story the building told. The suicide victims left the least trace of all. Evelyn McHale's photograph circulated for decades, but her name appears nowhere in the Empire State Building. The 30 to 50 others who jumped are commemorated nowhere. The observation deck, where many chose to die, now generates tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue. Tourists stand at the barriers that were installed to prevent jumps and take photographs of the skyline. They are unaware that the metal fencing exists because desperate people kept climbing over earlier, lower barriers to throw themselves into the air. The building does not mention this. It would harm business. Christopher Burmeister, the Danish musician shot and killed on the observation deck in 1997, has no memorial. His death prompted security changes. Metal detectors and bag screening were installed, but his name does not appear anywhere visitors might see it. The building absorbed his death as it had absorbed all the others. The observation deck reopened. Tourists returned. The revenue stream continued. The building's commercial function superseded any obligation to memorialize those who died within it. This absence of commemoration reveals something fundamental about how Americans relate to monuments. We celebrate the structure. We ignore the cost. The Empire State Building is iconic precisely because we have agreed to forget what it required. The construction deaths were necessary sacrifices to complete the project. The plane crash was an accident. Unfortunate, but not the building's fault. The suicides were personal tragedies unrelated to the building's purpose. The shooting was random violence that could have occurred anywhere. Each category of death is explained away, separated from the building's meaning, relegated to footnote status. What remains is the symbol. The Empire State Building represents American ambition, resilience, and achievement. It opened during the Depression as a monument to capitalism's failure and transformed itself into capitalism's triumph. The building mocked as the empty State Building now generates billions in value. The structure that nearly bankrupted its investors has made subsequent owners extraordinarily wealthy. The monument that seemed to represent everything wrong with speculation and excess became the defining symbol of New York City. This transformation required forgetting. It required separating the building from the blood that built it. The colored lights that illuminate the building each night embody this selective memory. The building glows red, white, and blue for Independence Day, pink for breast cancer awareness, rainbow colors for Pride Month, green for Earth Day. The lights celebrate causes, holidays, and cultural moments. They announce the building's participation in civic life. But the building is never lit to commemorate its construction workers. It is never lit to remember the plane crash victims. It is never lit for the suicide victims. It is never lit for Christopher Burmeister. Those deaths are not part of the building's public identity. They have been edited out. Tourists arrive each day by the thousands. They wait in lines that can extend for hours. They pass through security screening installed after violence proved the building vulnerable. They ride elevators to the 86th or 102nd floors. They look out over Manhattan and take photographs. They see the city spread below them. They see the other skyscrapers rising from the grid. They see Central Park and the rivers and the bridges. They do not see the construction workers who fell. They do not see the plane approaching through fog. They do not see Evelyn McHale climbing the fence. They do not see Ali Abu Kamal raising his gun. The building has removed those images from view. What remains is the spectacle, the vista, the experience of standing at the top of something famous. This is what the Empire State Building has become, a machine for producing tourist experiences and rental income, a symbol that has outlived its original purpose and found new ones, an icon that means whatever viewers need it to mean. The building appears in marriage proposals and disaster films, in romantic comedies and alien invasion scenarios. It is climbed by fictional apes and destroyed by fictional threats. It represents whatever story someone wants to tell about New York, about America, about ambition and achievement and urban life. The building is endlessly flexible. It contains multitudes. It can be anything except honest about what it cost. The question that remains is whether this matters. The building has stood for 93 years. It will likely stand for 93 more. The deaths that occurred during its construction and operation will recede further into history. Eventually, no one alive will remember when those deaths were recent news. The building will simply be what it appears to be: a beautiful Art Deco skyscraper, an observation deck with spectacular views, a symbol of New York City. The darkness will be completely buried. Perhaps that is acceptable. Perhaps monuments require forgetting. Perhaps we cannot honor achievement and acknowledge its cost simultaneously. Or perhaps we can. Perhaps a plaque in the lobby could list the names of workers who died during construction, if those names could be recovered. Perhaps the 79th floor could acknowledge the 14 people who died when a bomber struck the building. Perhaps the observation deck could mention, quietly and respectfully, that barriers exist because others chose this location for their final moments. Perhaps Christopher Burmeister's name could appear somewhere, not to sensationalize, not to discourage visitors, simply to acknowledge that the building's history includes tragedy alongside triumph, that what we celebrate was built by people who suffered and sometimes died, that the monument we light in celebration each night stands on foundations we prefer not to examine. The Empire State Building will make its own choices. It is a commercial property. Its owners maximize revenue. Memorializing deaths does not serve that goal. The building will continue to operate as it has operated. Tourists will visit. Tenants will rent office space. The colored lights will illuminate the tower. The building will endure. It has survived everything else. It will survive our questions about memory and cost and what we owe the dead. What remains certain is that the building stands. It has outlasted everyone who built it. It has outlasted those who mocked it. It has outlasted those who died within it. The Empire State Building endures because monuments endure. They outlast memory. They outlast guilt. They outlast the humans who created them and the humans who suffered for them. The building is here. The dead are gone. The city moves on. And each night, the lights turn on, celebrating something, commemorating something, announcing to the city below that the Empire State Building still stands, still matters, still commands attention. The building has won. It always wins. That is what monuments do. They stand, they persist, they survive, and we look up at them, admiring their beauty, forgetting what they cost, lighting them in celebration of everything except the truth they contain.